This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
Welcome to Beyond the Arc. My name is Kevin O'Connor. Today I'm bringing on the Ringer's Michael Pina. We're going to preview NBA free agency in the offseason ahead, and then I'm going to take some of your questions at the end of the show. But first, let's talk about the 8 teams with cap space and who their number one target should be. Let's bring on Michael Pina. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Arc. My name is Kevin O'Connor, and joining me this week is the Ringer's Michael Pina. Michael, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing terrific. Kevin, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent. We're going to talk about NBA free agency, look at the article you wrote in The Ringer, talk about a bunch of other teams, some of the key teams with cap space. Let's start off there. The San Antonio Spurs, Michael, they get the number one pick. They get Victor Wembanyama. They also have $38.6 million in cap space. So the key for them this offseason is using that cap money to build around Wemby, build around Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Sohan, Sidi Sissoko, their second-round pick. Who would be your top target for the Spurs this offseason?
My number one free agency target would be Fred VanVleet for the San Antonio Spurs. And the rationale behind that, despite him being 29 years old, despite him having a lot of miles on his body and being a little undersized, being a little inefficient, understand all of those caveats. But I just think that giving Victor Wembanyama a reliable professional point guard for the first 2, 3, 4 years of his career can only benefit him and make his life easier on the offensive end, where I think it'll take a little bit more time for him to adjust to the NBA than on the defensive end, where he'll be very good right away, presumably. And just having a table setter for all of those ancillary pieces that you mentioned, Sohan, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson. I just think that Fred VanVleet fits in really well with them. And why can't they make the play-in right away with a guy like Fred VanVleet, who's just a proven winner? So I think that if you're trying to establish a positive culture, if you're trying to get a professional in your locker room, a role model figure, a competitor, just makes a lot of sense to me.
I think VanVleet does make a lot of sense for the Spurs, considering all the circumstances you're talking about. If they can't get him, maybe go for multiple guys, a lower end free agent that you feel like maybe give him a bigger role, a Shake Milton type, go for a Grant Williams or a restricted free agent like that. And the thing with VanVleet is, Mark Stein reported on Wednesday that the Rockets are expected to offer him a 2-year contract worth $83 million. So that would exceed what the Spurs can do annually. And the Houston Rockets, they're in a position right now where they have over $60 million in cap space. And so for them, whether it's VanVleet, or being the team that makes a big offer sheet to an Austin Reeves to see what the Lakers do, somebody like that, it would be interesting for Houston. But who do you think their top target should be?
I mean, to be honest with you, if I was running Houston, I would let my rebuild be a little bit more organic, and I would take on bad salary. I would still be doing that with my cap space.
I'm with you.
And I understand why they're not going to. They have impatient ownership. They just hired Ime Udoka, and presumably they told him we're trying to win right away. Their first round pick is top 4 protected going to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So they have incentive to win right now. I wouldn't care if I was running things, but with what their plan is, presumably, I would just throw a max at Chris Middleton. Why not? I think he is on a talent level and in terms of what he's accomplished in the NBA, arguably the best player available, even though everyone thinks and all reports indicate he's going to re-sign with the Milwaukee Bucks. But if the Bucks are not willing to give him the max, which maybe they aren't, who knows, Houston could come in and steal him. And I know that definitely doesn't fit any logical timeline there. But if the mandate is make the play-in, maybe even make the playoffs as an 8 seed, Middleton makes a lot of sense to me, and he can stabilize you a little bit on both ends, particularly in crunch time on the offensive end, where the Houston Rockets were just like an absolute disaster last season.
I mean, hopefully Amen Thompson helps their rookie number 4 draft pick in the first round. But I think you're right in terms of what their intentions seem to be, which is to add some veteran help. I wouldn't do that either. We're on the same page there. I mentioned, go for Austin Reeves. I think if you go for an Austin Reeves and you give him the $100 million offer sheet and the Lakers match that, it accomplishes 2 things. You screw the Lakers by making them match that offer to get them a bigger salary, but also you can say to ownership, hey, we tried for something. And then maybe you're just in a position where, like the Utah Jazz, you just take on some big salary, continue with your youth movement. And speaking of the Jazz, they're going to have anywhere between $12 to $28 million in cap space, depending on what happens with Jordan Clarkson. He has a player option for next season that's due on Thursday night with his decision there. Utah takes on John Collins. They have what I thought was one of the best draft classes. They get Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh. The Jazz really added like a mixture of versatile defense and perimeter shot creation around Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler in that core that they already have. But now they get a little bit of money to play with. Who's your number 1 target?
I like Bruce Brown here. In an ideal world, Bruce Brown stays in Denver and just kind of spends the rest of his career, the rest of his prime there, and can make up the money on the back end. But what's more likely to happen is, since he opted out, if a team like Utah comes in with a huge offer, he could be gone. And if I'm the Jazz, what I love about their situation is they don't care about being good now, despite the fact that they just last offseason traded Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. They don't care because they have all this draft capital.
They can't help but be good or competitive.
Exactly. So why not add a ball handler, balance out my roster a little bit, someone who can run pick and roll with John Collins, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, someone who can defend up a position when the Jazz go a little bit smaller, and maybe Will Hardy wants to switch some more. Lauri held up pretty good on switches last year. John Collins has in the past in his career done okay. So I just think Bruce Brown, as energy, as hustle, someone who actually was hitting the 3 ball last year, someone who showed up and won finals games, like just a real competitor. And I think that honestly, if you start him in your backcourt with Colin Sexton, there's just a very unpleasant duo for any team to go up against. So I just like Bruce Brown in Utah.
I mean, as you're talking through, a potential outcome for the Jazz this offseason, if they get a Bruce Brown or somebody that provides that versatile defense you're talking about, they're one of the handful of teams, Oklahoma City, Orlando being 2 of the others, that have the ability to play with immense size. Like, they could go with a front court that features Taylor Hendricks, who's 6'8", 6'9", Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and then have a big backcourt. Or let's say they do get Bruce Brown, you could go with that smaller backcourt. You could have Bryce Sensabaugh out there as a go-to scorer, Keontae George, Bruce Brown defending up a position. You can play small, you can play super fast and versatile, or you can play massively and still have, skill on the floor with all the perimeter shooting that those guys have. So I think Utah they're one of those teams that's kind of moving in that direction. And I mentioned Oklahoma City. They're another team with cap space. They have about $18 million in cap space this offseason. They have Chet Holmgren coming back. They just drafted Wallace in the lottery, adding him to a backcourt with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. They're Josh Giddey. I mean, they have so much young talent. But with that cap space, I wonder, will they go in more of a youth direction or trying to add a veteran to support some of those younger players? What do you think they should do?
Well, you know who I got here because I sent you all my picks before, but Brook Lopez, baby. Just like go humongous with Brook and Chet in the front court. Give yourselves. Am I being hyperbolic if I say this would be or could be the best defense in the NBA next season?
No, you're not. You're not. But they could be. Chet's awesome. He's going to be awesome right away on defense.
Right. So you have a ton of size. I think that team could make the playoffs. I think maybe you could be competitive in the playoffs, win a round if SGA goes nuts, if Jalen takes a leap, if Giddey makes a leap as he's expected to do in year 3. Like, I think that Brook Lopez is just so interesting because when he's healthy, of course, he's a defensive player of the year candidate, amazing rim protector, but then also someone who can space at the 5, which is what they would ideally want / need with SGA being this guy who's just downhill, get to the free throw line, et cetera. So I think that would be a really fun outside the box addition for Oklahoma City. And I think they could make a leap as an organization if they added someone like Brook Lopez.
I just wonder, like somebody's got to be making a big offer for Brook Lopez. There's only one Brook Lopez. There's only one guy who's a defensive player of the year caliber guy, all defensive player caliber guy who can also space the floor on 3 and punish teams inside and rebound. I mean, Brook, he's a one of one, and he's perfect next to a Chet Holmgren or even San Antonio for that matter, putting him next to Victor Wembanyama. Mm-hmm. I just wonder which team is going to make that competitive offer that actually makes him think, you know what? I have no choice but to leave the Bucks, or they have to offer me significantly more to stay here. Another team that I would be curious about along those same lines is the Sacramento Kings. They dumped salary on draft night. They now have over $30 million in cap space. There's been rumblings of them going after Draymond Green, Kyle Kuzma. I'm intrigued by them. I'm intrigued by a Brook Lopez. I think they have a number of different options that they should explore with that space. Who's on your mind for the top target for the Kings?
I think it would be really interesting if they just kind of overpaid for Grant Williams. Like, there's rumors, as you said, about them wanting Draymond Green, but what about adding just a less expensive, younger, defensive-minded forward who can also shoot threes, which really works in that offense and would complement Domantas Sabonis, I think, really well. Obviously, Grant Williams is not as accomplished as Draymond Green, but they need a defensive upgrade in their front court. They need a little bit more versatility. I think Grant would fit really well, and he's the type of piece who I think any team in the league should want, whether you're trying to go from bad to good, or you're a championship contender trying to go over the top, or you're trying to go from good to great. I think that which is where Sacramento kind of is right now. I think that he can make life easier for everyone around him. He's obviously a really great locker room fit, and he's on the timeline with where they are right now as an organization. So I wouldn't think it would be crazy for them to just kind of overpay, and it would probably be a shorter term deal, just something to make it so the Celtics do not match. I think Sacramento would be a really interesting fit for him.
I think Grant Williams is one of those under the radar free agents, even though people know his name. I'm not sure people know about his, upside in a situation that really feeds him, 30 plus minutes a game every single night. He's a 40% guy from 3. He's versatile on defense. I just think Grant Williams also, looking back at what he was at Tennessee in college, he's got some playmaking skill. I'd be curious about him as he can share the floor with Domantas Sabonis as a guy spacing the floor, cutting the basket. But if Sabonis isn't on the floor, I think Grant Williams could be a guy who could be in that dribble handoff role. He's got playmaking
100%.
skill. And I think for Sacramento, he's more he's a better fit alongside all their existing pieces than Kuzma is. In my opinion, I get the Kuzma appeal. They've wanted him for years. When he was on the Lakers, they were trying for the Buddy Hield trade. Didn't happen. I think Kuzma, as much as I like him, is not an ideal fit. Grant Williams should be the guy there. I think Grant fits a lot of different teams. You know, you get in the Eastern Conference, the Indiana has $30 million plus in cap space. Detroit does as well. Both of those teams make some sense to me for Grant Williams as well. Starting with Indiana, $32 million in cap space. Who comes to mind to you for their best fit?
This is pie in the sky, but Draymond Green just, completely change what your expectations are as an organization. Obviously, you're going to pay Tyrese Haliburton the max extension right now, but Draymond at the 4, it's a positional need, I think, for them. They don't really have much size in the front court in terms of, wing forward type of versatility on the defensive end. So he gives it right there. And then you can go small with Draymond at the 5, Haliburton as your point, and just be one of the smartest passing teams in the NBA. Play super fast. And I don't know. I really love it for them. And obviously they drafted Jarris Walker in the first round. Let Draymond be like his mentor, right away.
I'm intrigued. I mean, like you said, pie in the sky, very unrealistic. It feels like for Detroit, that'd be more likely if they really wanted to, go pedal to the metal and accelerate things around Cade and all their guys. Cam Johnson, we both agree. You told me ahead of time with Cam that he's the realistic target for the Pistons. All reports say that he's a guy that they're going to go after as well. I think for Detroit, that makes sense. And then for the Magic, they have over $20 million in cap space. Who's your top target for them? It's got to be a shooter, I would imagine. They have to get more shooting around all their guys.
Yeah, it's Max Strus from the Miami Heat. Like, just throw money at Max Strus. I think that in terms of his actual accuracy, his 3-point percentage, it isn't where you would think it is based on his reputation. But for a team that just needs space, he's perfect. Like, you can run actions for him. You could just have him spot up. Teams are going to respect him. Teams are going to guard him. And he could have a bounce back season easily and shoot over 40% from behind the 3-point line also. So I think what he showed in the postseason, their run as a two-way player, smart veteran, and just someone who can contribute in a lot of different ways. He just makes a lot of sense as an accentuating piece for all the young talent that they have there.
All right, now let's talk about teams that can use the mid-level exception. This is a tool that teams over the salary cap can utilize if they're under the luxury tax. There's 12 teams that have it. We'll talk about some of those. The Hawks, Nets, Hornets, Cavs, Mavs, Lakers, Grizzlies, Wolves, Knicks, Blazers, Raptors, Wizards. Those are the 12 teams. Of all those 12, Michael, the one that everybody's talking about the most right now is the Portland Trail Blazers. Obviously, with all the Damian Lillard trade rumors, he has a meeting earlier in the week. They're committed to trying to build a winner around him. I've heard, they're shopping Yusuf Nurkic around. I've heard they want to pursue Draymond Green, that interest is, supposedly real. I don't think it necessarily makes a lot of sense because they'd also have to move Anthony Simons. So you're telling me to make space for Draymond Green, you're moving Nurkic and Simons into space and getting only draft picks back. My impression is this is more about signaling effort to Damian Lillard that, hey, we're trying to build a winner more than anything else. I don't think it's realistic.
It's a thread the needle proposition for sure. I think there are potentially trades out there, especially with Simons. I think that he has value, given his age, given his upside, skill set.
Totally.
And the contract, which is not exorbitant. So I think you could get something, a more experienced player who better fits you as just in terms of complementing Dame on the defensive end. I wrote a column for The Ringer earlier this week, and I proposed just a straight Simons for Isaiah Stewart swap. And I think people will look at that and kind of scoff potentially, but it's less about like, are you getting back the most value for Anthony Simons than are you getting someone who makes sense on your team that's trying to win right now? And they need size. Every team needs size in the Western Conference because of Jokic, but like you need more size if you're the Portland Trail Blazers. And the other part of it is upgrading at the 5 position. I think that'll be kind of hard, to be honest with you. I don't know what Yusuf Nurkic's value is right now on that contract.
It's low, very low.
Yeah,
zero.
It's
actually
low. I was trying to be nice, but
you don't have
he
to
also
be
just
nice.
gets he also just gets hurt a lot. Can't stay healthy. I think that, their defense has actually been pretty good when he's been on the court the past few seasons, but again, can't stay healthy, not really reliable. So getting a little bit more rim protection would be ideal. I mean, if you can get like a Clint Capella type, that would be perfect. But I just, some of the players that I listed in my column, Daniel Gafford, Mitchell Robinson, these are the types that I think they should be targeting because they make sense in Portland, where a team that just hasn't been able to protect the paint at all for the past few years. So it's just going to be really difficult if you're not willing to give up on or move on from Scoot before he plays a game.
They're not doing that. No way.
No, they're not.
Chance.
They're not doing Scoot, and they're not moving Shaedon Sharpe. So these are kind of the two pieces that you have to dangle around. Maybe you change the protections on your first-round pick that's going to Chicago so you can open things up and move more future first. That seems like an ideal first step for them as they try to get better. But yeah, it's going to be tough for them to pull this off. I personally think it's worthwhile, though. I would like to see Dame stay in Portland. I would like to see what Scoot can bring as a rookie. If he's like, oh, this guy might win Rookie of the Year, that's great. Shaedon Sharpe could make a leap. You re-sign Jeremy Grant. You re-sign Matisse Thybulle. I think you could have something there. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive.
My theory is that the Blazers want to go with the two timelines approach and take this into January, February, and then reassess. Because by that point, maybe you're in a position where it's not just Miami, it's not just Brooklyn that are on his list, these teams that are willing to go with all-in offers. Maybe by that point, you have a surprise team. Utah, we're the 2 seed. OKC, we're the 4 seed. Let's really, push forward and cash in some of these picks. At that point, maybe you say screw it to Dame's list and you just take the best offer. You mentioned all the size that they need. Minnesota has a surplus of size. They have the mid-level exception this year. They have a little bit of wiggle room, but they have $90 million committed to Rudy Gobert, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Naz Reid after re-signing him to a 3-year contract. I've heard Minnesota's telling teams that Cat's not available. Every other team does think he is available. With Karl-Anthony Towns, is there kind of a dream fit you have for him if they were to trade him, from both sides?
The team that I have listed in my column that I mentioned was the Los Angeles Clippers.
I agree.
And I think that Norm Powell, Marcus Morris, and whatever first you can give up, give it up. And
you're not giving Paul George if you're the Clippers? Are you willing to give George up if Minnesota demands him?
No. I personally would not.
Okay.
I know this will be very expensive. And that's kind of the reason why, if I'm Minnesota, and the reason why everyone around the league assumes that they're going to have to move him, is like, just look at the contract after next season. It goes up. It's 39, I think now. It goes up in mid 40s, high 40s right away. So yeah, I think the only team, or one of the only teams, that would be willing to pay is the one owned by Steve Ballmer, one of the richest men in the world. And I wouldn't give up Paul George for the simple reason that if I'm willing to pay and just pay through the nose, as the Phoenix Suns have decided to do with their roster, I just want to be as good as possible. I mean, it sounds really reductive. I just want to be as good as possible. Like, I want Paul George. I want Kawhi Leonard. I want Cat. I will be the favorite to win the title, I think, if that all happens.
They'll be your favorite every year. The Clippers until they
You're talking to me? Yes.
Do. Yeah. I mean, I think for them, they should be aggressive. I don't know if, that's acceptable for Minnesota, considering his upside as a player. I'm intrigued by, like, let's say the Warriors either this summer or mid-season say, you know what, we'll flip Chris Paul in a non-aggregate deal, which would allow them to use his salary for a Cat-esque, salary player. Then they have Kuminga and Moody, these younger players that a team like Minnesota could want to have around, growing with Anthony Edwards and their other youth. Or Brooklyn, they have Ben Simmons. He has 2 years left on his salary. In theory, Ben Simmons with Rudy Gobert would not be the best offensive fit unless you think about it like, you have Simmons running dribble handoffs. He's healthy. He's locking down on the perimeter defensively. Gobert protecting the rim, and Nasri can be the guy who spaces for you. Either of those teams, Brooklyn, Golden State, I think are my, dream world fits for Karl-Anthony Towns. But ultimately, it's kind of hard to find a fit for him. In terms of centers, I do wonder about, we heard DeAndre Ayton, according to Mark Stein, was involved with trade talks for the Dallas Mavericks. They have their mid-level. They drafted Derek Lively with their lottery pick. I wouldn't imagine that they're in on, rim running, rim protecting centers at this point. But, they seem to be targeting centers, or they were at one point. I wonder now where they turn their attention with their mid-level. What do you think the Dallas Mavericks should be prioritizing?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, when I saw that they were interested in Clint Capella also, didn't surprise me. And, not being willing to give up Josh Green for him, I understand. That is something that I would take a longer look at personally. I like Josh Green a lot. I like his upside. I thought he had a really good year, and he's obviously a lot cheaper, a lot younger. I just think Clint Capella is kind of the ideal big that you want next to Luka. And assuming you bring back Kyrie Irving also, like that makes a lot of sense in just a pick and roll heavy offense. Like having shooters, having a roll man, like that's the key right there for this team with Luka. And we've seen how much success offensively the Hawks have had with Trae Young using that recipe. I think it would be even better in Dallas. So that just makes a lot of sense to me, adding a piece like that. Ayton did also make a lot of sense to me if you were going to treat him the same way. Defensively, it's a little less consistent. On the glass, on both ends, also a little less consistent than what Clint Capella would bring. But size is just kind of like the name of the game right now, I think, for a lot of teams that are looking at the Denver Nuggets and like, how can we beat this team?
You mentioned Clint Capella, his fit with Trae Young in Atlanta. They had, what I think is a fascinating offseason so far. They drafted Kobe Buffkin in the middle of the first round. He's interesting. I talked about this with Kyle Mann on the draft show because he's an elite off-ball guy. And Quinn Snyder and some of those Hawks players have talked about the motion concepts that he wants to install. You bring him in, you trade John Collins. That opens up more playing time for Okongwu at center, Jalen Johnson, who's, more of your DHO, versatile center, be good in the kind of a motion system. It feels like every decision that the front office is making this offseason points to Quinn Snyder. We're going to play with motion. Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, you guys have to adapt. Is that your impressions as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think money is kind of like the driving factor in Atlanta, more so than what I'm getting on the court, honestly. Like, I don't know if they're necessarily all done with, long-term getting off of this money. Like, I don't know how much DeJounte Murray is going to come. He's extension eligible. I don't know how much he's going to command, or if they're going to be super pumped about being the team that signs him to a contract, or if they feel they need to because of what they gave up to get him. So
three first-round picks they gave up to get DeJounte Murray. And for context, the Celtics gave up a protected pick and one other first, right? I mean, what a difference.
Yeah, they gave up a lot. But then also you have just guys who are, frankly, a little overpaid. DeAndre Hunter on his long-term contract. I'm a big fan of his, but last season he didn't kind of take the step that I thought he would. And maybe he just isn't the right aesthetic fit with Trae and DeJounte, just in terms of how he plays. And maybe he needs to be in a situation where he holds the ball a lot more. And maybe Quinn Snyder understands that. Maybe they stagger a little bit more and they give the ball to DeAndre and everything works out. But you mentioned all of the young pieces too. I think these guys deserve more playing time. And I think maybe the organization should take an understanding that we're not going to win the title. We're not going to go in a deep playoff run right now. So let's let Okongwu cook, AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson, let's give Kobe Buffkin minutes as a rookie. Let's see how it looks. And then I think you have some tough questions for yourself as an organization with Trae Young, right? Like that's the kind of the elephant in the room here. Is this your franchise player? Is this who you want to build around? Is this the direction? Is this your leader as you go forward on his massive contract? So I think they have a lot of questions right now. And I think like financially, just their inability or unwillingness to pay the luxury tax is kind of telling for me about where they want to be and where they're headed right now.
I mean, I think this is the prove it year for Trae Young in the eyes of Quinn Snyder and that Hawks front office because, I think, you're right. Like salary is a factor with some of their decisions, but I think like those draft picks, and also the existing young guys on the roster and Quinn Snyder's history in Utah, all of that points to, hey, Trae, you can't be a zero when the ball's not in your hands. You can't just be spot up guy from the logo. You need to be moving like you did in college at Oklahoma. He has that in him. I have belief in him that he can do that. This is the year I think he's going to have to prove that. And, Quinn Snyder, the Jazz and Hawks didn't play much over the years, but anytime they did, Snyder was attacks, Trae Young on defense. I think he got better, latter half of the season, he was putting in effort. To me, this is the prove it year for Trae Young. And otherwise, maybe by next deadline or next offseason, we're talking, trades with Trae Young. Right now, this has been a weird week. Last thing on these mid-level teams, Brian Windhorst goes on the radio this week and he says, there's speculation. There's some outlandish stuff out there. He doesn't want to tease too much, but he said, just go on social media and see what you see in regards to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Michael, are the Cavs up to something big? What's going on? What's Windy talking about?
Windy knows more than I do.
More than all of us.
Yeah, obviously, they have the non-taxpayer mid-level to spend. They have, Jared Allen had a disappointing postseason first round where he was manhandled by Mitchell Robinson on the offensive glass, and that was a big reason that they lost that series. I don't know if they are necessarily ready or they should move on from Jared Allen. They had the best defense in the NBA last season, and primarily because he was a fantastic rim protector for them alongside Evan Mobley. I don't think they won't necessarily want to make Evan Mobley their full-time five either. That's just not good for his body right now. So I don't know what it is. Getting a wing who can shoot threes. We talked about Max Strus. If they offer the mid-level, will the Miami Heat be like, okay, we'll also pay you $12 million, $13 million with bird rights, whatever it is? Like, I don't know. 3-point shooting wings, though, are what they need, and I think that they can get a lot better if they just add that one piece. But I don't know what big moves that they have. I don't know how flexible they are to make those moves because they gave up all their assets to get Donovan Mitchell. Like, this is kind of their team.
Would you trade Mitchell? Would you think about it? Would it be at least on your table of options?
Yeah, I'm not shopping him for sure. I'm not doing that.
You're listening.
You tell me what I'm getting back.
Jaylen Brown. I'm the Celtics. I'm calling and offering you Jaylen Brown, who's expiring in 1 year for your expiring in 2 years. Are you thinking about it?
Wow. You're putting me on the spot there. That's a very interesting.
You're thinking about it. I can tell you're thinking about it.
Oh, you got to think about it.
Yeah.
Very interesting proposition, I think, for both teams. I guess like what you're thinking about if you're the Celtics is, what is our defensive identity right now as a team? Because I don't think we're going to be able to switch everything like as we have done of the past few seasons with Marcus Smart going out and Kristaps Porzingis coming in. So maybe we can afford to go down a level with our wing defense and up a level with our offensive dynamism with Mitchell in exchange for Jaylen, knowing that we have this size and this rim protection behind him. I don't know. I think Donovan Mitchell is a little bit better. So that's really interesting. And if you are Cleveland, you're banking on Jaylen Brown being like your wing stopper.
Sure.
And someone who can consistently knock down spot up threes also, but do a lot more for you offensively as the primary scoring option. But ultimately, I think neither team would say yes to this, but it is interesting.
When we're back, we'll talk about some under the radar free agents. All right, Michael, we just saw Bruce Brown help win a ring for the Denver Nuggets. He has the big offensive board late in the game to have the go-ahead points for Denver in Game 5. He has an outstanding playoff run. I feel like if you're Denver right now, you're going to be feeling like, okay, I don't think there's anybody making moves yet that, make us really worried. But there's still free agency to go. There's still more trades to come. I want to feed some under the radar free agents that I have on my mind to you that could help a contending team. Let's start off with Ayo Dosunmu from the Chicago Bulls. Similar dimensions to Bruce Brown, 6'4", 200 pounds, similar playing style, smart cutter. He's made 69% of his unassisted layups. He also, like Bruce Brown, had a game-winning putback layup this season. Played point guard in college, but has had to adapt. He needs a reliable jumper like Bruce Brown. He's a good versatile defender. It's like checking the boxes up and down. Ayo Dosunmu feels like a guy to me that teams, should be pursuing on the cheap to try to take him from the Bulls.
Super interesting player, tough player, two-way player, has size, had experience running point for them last year, and I think he did an okay job. If not, the role was a little big for him. But obviously getting better too, and contributed right away out of college. I thought that was really impressive to see. Great stat by you about his ability to finish at the rim. That's very attractive. If he can knock down, at the end of the day, like if you can guard your man, guard your yard, and knock down open threes, then you have value. And he can do a little bit more than that too. So if he was consistent behind the 3-point line, spotting up, maybe shooting in motion a little bit, and then obviously demanding hard closeouts, attacking, getting downhill, making things happen. For sure, I could see him in the rotation of a very, very good team.
Shake Milton, another guy from the Sixers. He's been, a pretty, steady rotation guy in the back of the Sixers bench on and off, under Doc Rivers. I think with him, 6'5", solid on defense, good finisher at the basket, makes 44% of pulled-up mid-range shots in his career, 39% of threes off the catch throughout his career. And with Shake Milton, there's been reports this week from Kyle Neubeck, who's a great Sixers beat reporter. He said Shake wants a bigger role. And, I think you look earlier this season during a stretch when James Harden was out, 8 straight games. He plays 38 minutes per game. He averages 21 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds on superb efficiency. Shake just feels like at worst he's going to be a solid rotation guy as he has been for years with the Sixers. At best, I mentioned him for San Antonio earlier. Maybe he ends up, being a lot more than that. I like Shake Milton.
Yeah, I think you might be a little bit higher on him than I am, but for everything you said, and for everything I said before about Ayo Dosunmu, like if you can knock down open threes and if you can guard your man, if you can be a little dynamic with the ball in your hands, then you're going to get minutes in the playoffs. Doc Rivers obviously did not think that he was good enough to get minutes in the playoffs last year, particularly for a team that could have used a little more athleticism, I thought. So, yeah, I think San Antonio is maybe a better fit, or a team that is looking to develop and get someone on the cheap. That's probably a better spot for him. Maybe I could be wrong, but I'd more likely to see him get minutes on a team like that than a contender or a team that wants to win the title.
What do you think about PJ Washington from Charlotte? Because I love PJ Washington. To me, you had him in your column earlier this week as a potential trade target guy, sign and trade possibility. 6'7", small ball 5, versatile on defense and on offense. I don't know, Michael. I feel like PJ is one of those guys. He goes to a new team and suddenly, he's a key factor on a playoff team.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really watched the Charlotte Hornets last year, which I can't blame you if you didn't. PJ Washington is a nice player. He's a very attractive restricted free agent, and they just drafted Brandon Miller. So presumably, if you threw an offer at him, I don't know if Charlotte's going to match it. So there's real value here, a lot of upside. I love his minutes as a backup 5, small ball 5, those were very interesting to me and something that I think a good team could explore if you get him. But just size, shooting, he's a good, solid NBA player who's not old. So I think if a good team can get him in the door, maybe, obviously via sign and trade would be a very interesting path there. He could become someone that a lot more NBA fans become aware of very quickly, I think.
I want to give you a little pop quiz here, a little stat from Second Spectrum. There are 4 players this past season, Michael, that logged over 900 plays as the screener in the pick and roll and over 100 plays as the ball handler in the pick and roll. 4 players. PJ Washington is one of those 4. Any guesses on who the other 3 are?
I would say Jokic.
That's correct.
Giannis.
Nope.
All my momentum is gone. I need hints, or you got to just tell me.
The most improved player, Lauri Markkanen, and thumbs up, thumbs down, Julius Randle of the New York Knicks. Those are the 4. So not a lot of guys that can both run pick and roll for you and be a screener finishing at the basket. I just think PJ's versatility on defense, you talked about it. Offensively, he has his 43-point game against the Thunder, 31 in an overtime game earlier in the season against the Warriors. I'm super high on PJ Washington, and if I'm the Hornets, I want to keep him even though you draft Brandon Miller. I think those guys can play together and grow together and provide a ton of size and shot making, in that front court alongside Mark Williams as your rim protecting center. Just a couple other guys to talk about here. Trey Lyles out of Sacramento. We saw him play some important small ball 5 minutes in the playoffs for the Kings. We talked about Grant Williams earlier with that value in Sacramento. Trey Lyles kind of showed the versatility there and the importance in that type of role. And Jock Landale, Phoenix Suns center, dude's just rock solid, high effort guy. I think the Suns should bring him back. Either of those guys, do you think they should be under the radar free agents for some contending teams?
I think Landale is going to stay in Phoenix, as you said. Phoenix has every incentive to pay him a lot of money, trade asset, or just they don't want to lose a guy who, I'm not going to say he defended Jokic great in the playoffs, but he was physical. You know what I mean? So just a big body. I don't think they can afford to lose him, and I do like his game. The other player, Trey Lyles, looked like a Hall of Famer for stretches in that first round series against the Golden State Warriors. I was a huge fan. He stunned me, frankly, with some of his chops, the shot making, the just going toe to toe with Draymond in small ball 5 units. I was stunned when I was watching. I guess it would actually be painful for him to leave Sacramento. I don't think they can afford to lose him, frankly. He's awesome. I don't know what his market is. I don't think teams are going to be throwing bags of cash at him, but in the role he had in Sacramento and what he showed in the playoffs, awesome player all of a sudden.
It's going to be an interesting summer here, Michael Pina. We got $136 million in salary cap. $165 million luxury tax, and then we get the first and second apron above that. A lot of teams don't have money, still going to be trying to make sign and trades. A lot of teams with the mid-level that we talked about, and then those 8 teams currently with salary cap space. I'm excited, man. I think this could be a fun summer. I'm not sure we'll get as many superstar trades as expected, but I think, for the most part, if you're Denver right now and you're kind of seeing the landscape, how things are developing, I think if you're in the Nuggets, you're going to be feeling pretty good. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. Almost whether or not they bring back Bruce Brown, although if they can somehow get him back, odds on favorite if everyone stays healthy to repeat as champions. Really love that basketball team. One quick note, I just want to say, I think people really don't understand yet how impactful this new CBA is on the NBA, just based on the reaction I get from fans to hypothetical trades, or when I see actual trades that happen, just how did Team X only get that for player Y? Well, it's the money is just so important right now. It really is. And teams are petrified of this new CBA and really wanting to avoid the second tax apron, let alone the first tax apron, which nobody talks about, which is also a thing that can be restrictive. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw big money short-term deals, 1-2 year contracts doled out to some of these players who it'll kind of blow your mind, I think, at the money you could see from someone like Grant Williams or Max Strus, 1 or 2 year deal. Just something to keep an eye on as we go forward.
Except for the Suns. They don't care. They're not worried about it.
Exactly. Yep. Blew right past it.
Yeah. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on Beyond the Arc.
Thank you, homie.
Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. I asked you to submit some questions to me on Twitter to answer today on the show. To close, looking ahead to the offseason, let's start off with a question from Ben. Ben asked, if you were betting on it, what team does Dame start on next year? The Portland Trailblazers. Let's just go with Portland. It feels like a marriage here that's unwilling to break up. They're not willing to go towards the divorce yet. They want to try to make things work. And like Michael Pina and I talked about earlier, I think their intentions are pure to try to improve the team around Damian Lillard. It's just going to be a matter of actually making that happen. But I could see them dragging things into the actual season and then figure things out then. A question here from Connor. What young team do you think is poised to make a jump this year and possibly vault themselves into the future contender conversation? Michael and I talked a bit earlier about the Utah Jazz and what they should do this offseason. To me, they're the team. I think what they did this offseason, you got Walker Kessler already. Lauri Markkanen's the most improved player of the year, but then the 3 rookies that they added, Taylor Hendricks in the lottery, he's a guy who, even though he's only a freshman out of college, he's ready to come in right away and be a rock solid, high IQ defensive player, 40% shooter from threes, just knows how to play within an offense. You bring him in alongside Keontae George out of Baylor, who I had ranked as a lottery pick. I toyed with having him in my top 10 on my big board throughout the year. He brings you the energy as a scorer off the dribble that you need, and he has upside. He's trimmed some weight. I'll be curious to see how that affects him, but he's surrounded by length and versatility. That's the key to what Michael and I talked about here. And I think Keontae George and then Bryce Sensabaugh, their late first-round draft pick, as a go-to scoring guy. The infrastructure is there for Utah to have a good young team. We saw it last season where they were in the playoff conversation the entire first half of the year. I think this coming year, depending on what they do this offseason, or maybe even regardless of what they do, they're in a position to take another leap forward. And I am just, honestly, like above all young teams in the league, besides San Antonio with Wemby or OKC with what they get going on, Utah is a team that I think could kind of, thrust themselves in the top 5, top 6 of the Eastern Conference this coming season. Let's move on to a question from Justin. This one was, clearly made specifically for me. What team would you like to see Killian Hayes on? The Suns? Sad that it's gotten to this point for my guy Killian with the Detroit Pistons. I think he's a good example of a player, though, and we see this around the league all the time. These guys who don't work out until their second or their third team. Killian this last year with Detroit, he becomes a knockdown mid-range shooter, good defender, good passer. He just can't score from 3. He can't score, with great efficiency at the basket, doesn't draw many fouls. He's still a bit sluggish off the dribble, but the flashes are there from mid-range. We see him have a good middle of the season. I think, if you're a team like San Antonio, bring him in and give him 20, 25 minutes per game off the bench and see what he can do working with Victor Wembanyama, a fellow Frenchman. I think San Antonio, I'd love to see a young team that can provide him minutes. Give him an opportunity, because even though Killian, he's not going to become some superstar, I still have belief in him becoming somebody who can be a solid rotation guy because of his foundational skills as a good decision maker, as a passer, and because of his defense. He's 6'5", he has size. I hope somebody gives him an opportunity. Let's move on to the next question here. All right, we have a question here from Graham Shaw. He says, if Siakam won't commit to extending his contract with other teams, do the Raptors actually have any value blow-it-up options, or do they have to keep working the margins, hoping Scotty Barnes makes a leap? And yes, that last part of your question, Graham, you're not getting Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp for Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby. Portland's not doing that, unfortunately, for your sake. I think you're right on about the latter point that they're going to have to continue working the margins here. With Siakam, maybe it's about timing, finding the right fit for him in a trade to a team that actually, is willing to pay him big money and that he has interest in re-signing with. But I think you're right, though, with Scotty Barnes, it's going to be about building a little slower here. If you can't find a good home for Pascal Siakam, Barnes, obviously, he wins Rookie of the Year. He's not quite his second season, didn't take the leap as expected. And maybe part of that is because of, the presence of Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, where it's not, an ideal fit for him. And then you have Jakob Poeltl now as a center, a non-shooting big. These guys at the wing position can make it work together. It can fit, but it's not an ideal world for Scotty Barnes. You want Scotty Barnes surrounded by shooters. That's why you draft Grady Dick. That's why I think you're going to see them pursue some shooters in free agency or through trade. So maybe for Pascal Siakam, it's less about, a rebuild style trade for a Scoot Henderson or, a Shaden Sharp. And maybe it's more about finding a guy of, near equivalent value or multiple players who are just better fits around what you have with Scotty Barnes. But it's a very interesting position for them. They signed a developmental head coach from the Memphis Grizzlies. It's going to be interesting to see what that front office does this offseason. We have a last question here from all caps, not at Noski. Is Wemby's rookie season destined to disappoint everybody simply because he's being so hyped? The answer is possibly. It's possible that he could disappoint if your expectations are that this guy comes in and he is a, all NBA, all-star right away. I think with Wembanyama, though, there's no chance that he will disappoint except for injury, because if you're setting realistic expectations for him, Wembanyama is going to come in and be a major difference maker on defense for the Spurs. It'd be shocking if he isn't even better than expected now that he's surrounded by so much NBA caliber talent. And then offensively, I don't think you should be expecting him to be, 20 point per game guy necessarily right away. He shot below 30% from three this past season overseas, off the dribble. He's been good, but not great from mid-range. So I think for him, this is a year where, again, realistic expectations are it's about finding his place within an offense next to all that talent. Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, Keldon Johnson, and we'll see what other additions San Antonio makes. With him, it's about, finishing at the rim at 70+% like he did overseas, improving as a screener. If those are your expectations, he's going to meet those. And maybe, he figures out that 3-point shot this year, and then he becomes a guy who is completely exceeding expectation if that becomes a knockdown thing for him. And I'm betting that he will, whether it's his rookie year or whether it's sometime in the near future. And with Wemby, he's got the work ethic. He's got the mindset, and he also has the track record of improvements. You look back at his numbers and his shooting form the last 2-3 years. Every year he gets better as a free throw shooter. Every year he gets better from mid-range. I think it's only a matter of time until that 3-point shot is a knockdown weapon for him, and he becomes one of the most unstoppable forces in all of the NBA. But as a rookie, I don't think it's going to happen right away, but it will happen eventually. And with Victor Wembanyama, I am very, very, very excited to watch him, assuming he does play in Las Vegas. We saw reports today that he is not going to be going to the California Classic with the San Antonio Spurs. He'll be making his first appearance with the team in Las Vegas at Summer League. We will be there. Beyond the Arc will be there. The Ringer will have a presence there. I am very excited to see you all in Vegas for the Summer League to watch all of these rookies. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. We'll be back next Thursday.